Hey, what's going on, guys? Mariano5 here for Razor Edge, and I'm with FaLLout86, and we're back with another video here. This time it's a hand that he played at the 2-4 Euro No Limit Games a couple months back before the quarantine, obviously. So, yeah, let's get into it here. Fish opens cut off. Do you have any info on this guy? I mean, he's obviously, you have him marked as a fish, but...
Yeah, I played with him a couple of rounds, and he was clearly a recreational player. So playing super loose, super bad post flop, calling down with all kinds of hands. And the player in the small blind that called the open was a complete unknown. Just new at the table, never played with him before.
Okay. So yeah, this guy calls, and then I think pretty standard call. Like obviously you do want to have 3-betting range, but I think here going pretty linear, you know, I wouldn't really try to mix in too many like suited connectors and stuff if you're unsure if the fish can ever fold. So just go like whatever, like pocket nines plus, and then whatever, you know, like suited broadways, that type of thing. Obviously ace queen type hands, right? Pretty standard, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think against better opponents, mixing even like 10-9 and 7-8 and stuff is totally fine. But 10-8 suited is definitely one of the weaker hands, and yeah, especially against the cutoff, that's probably never folding to our suited. We should have a way stronger suited range overall. So something like ace-10, maybe ace-9 suited, ace-10 off, something like this should be okay-ish because he calls with so many worse hands. But yeah, it makes no sense to suited with 10 high when he calls all the better king high and queen high and ace high type hands. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So pretty good flop, top and bottom, and you actually end up donking here. Which what do you think about this play?
Yeah, against one unknown and one fun player, I decided to donk because this board texture is getting checked a ton, and I don't want to lose too much value, because even with 8x and 9x, they pot control super often. Of course, they are not going to bluff this board with a high frequency, because it hits all calling range also really well. So I thought I can definitely donk this board texture very profitably with a fairly strong range, and I also opt for a somewhat bigger sizing. What do you think here?
Yeah, I think it's okay against weaker players. I think against better players, I wouldn't donk this spot. I don't think, just because they can still have like all the nutted hands. Like cutoff can still have all the queen jack offs, quite a lot of two pairs and sets. So I'd be pretty careful. Because I don't necessarily think this board is better for our range than theirs, but I think versus weaker players, it's totally fine. And then I think sizing is interesting, donking sizing, because I think bigger is okay, but I think smaller could be okay too, just because on this board there's going to be a lot of bad turns, right? So I might want to like size down a bit and then wait for like a brick turn and then start putting some big bets, possibly even over bets in. Just because again, like any like jack, queen, 7-6, even like king, it's going to be somewhat hard to play. But I think against weaker players, again, it's fine to size up as well too, because the ranges are going to be so wide. So I think anywhere between like a third and like, you know, 2/3, but definitely I wouldn't go something like full pot here, just because again, the playability on a lot of runouts can be pretty tough.
Yeah, then we definitely need more infos on our opponent, that he's super bad, calling down with all kinds of hands, even on later streets. But yeah, like you mentioned, against better opponents, definitely makes sense to be way more polarized. So when we have a donking range, we should really have nutted hands and air, and not those middling type hands that get us into a lot of trouble. So for example, leading hands like queen jack and some jack x or queen x with backdoor flush draws is definitely fine, even against racks.
Yeah.
But betting like bottom two or middling two pair, not the best idea, because we get into so many dicey situations on later streets.
Yeah, for sure. But it's, I mean, yeah, again, against weaker players, it's always fine to put in, you know, a lot of money with their strong hands and just play really, you know, aggressive bet poker. Obviously tougher out of position on these type of boards, but that's just something you want to be doing, is just, you know, applying pressure. So they both call, pretty interesting. No raises, and then turn definitely gets interesting here because the unknown player leads on this. Obviously a total brick. I mean, this I can't imagine anyone even has pocket threes or any type of two pair, so I don't really know what the hell he's doing. And it's kind of obviously kind of concerning when this happens, you know, from an unknown, you know, like you don't expect him just to do it with some random, I don't know, like I mean, they obviously can have some random draws and stuff, but you're still concerned that, you know, they could maybe obviously have some straights and sets and stuff in the range. But what do you think you're facing this bet?
Yeah, it's a super weird bet. It's a big bet, and it's also weird because we don't lead flop, right? And both opponents called.
Yeah.
So I think with some frequency, both opponents would raise their straights. So 6-7 or Jack-7 suited or Queen-Jack, I think with some frequency they are going to raise flop, and sometimes they will also opt for a call. So on the turn, I think the unknown player could have some straights, but I also think he can have some draws. Like a random jack, a random queen, whatever, maybe a hand like king queen with clubs that he's bluffing now. Could make sense. The only thing that is tricky is his bet size, because he bets really, really large in comparison of the pot. It looks really strong, looks super polarized. This is not happening too often, especially when we lead flop. But I don't think he has too many middling type hands like Jack-10 or Ace-10. You basically never see those hands. Yeah, or would you also assign him a weaker range or more hands in his range?
No, I mean, I think that's about right. It is, again, pretty hard to assign him a range because it's not really a line people should be taking there when he's betting into like two players who have, I mean, our range is definitely uncapped. Like the fish in the cutoff, his range is a little bit more capped because, as you say, he's probably going to raise with like queen jack and sets quite often, but it's still a spot where it's like, this guy shouldn't be expecting a ton of fold equity after you bet big on the flop and the other guy calls. So I really wouldn't expect him to have like, I don't know, like 9x or just like some random 7x. But the thing is, in these games, you can't really make those solid reads against like unknowns, because people just play random shit all the time, right? So you got to be careful. So I think your hand here is just like way too strong to fold. I mean, it's obviously not the greatest spot. I think shoving is just going to be an overplay, because shoving, you're basically just going to get snapped by like better two pair, like 10-9, and then obviously some straights, and he could have some sets. Like maybe you could get value from like 9-8 specifically, but I think it'd be pretty hard to get value from too many worse hands if you jam. Maybe like 10 jack, but yeah, I think jamming's an overplay.
Yeah, I agree.
And like even the thing is, I think even with the nuts, I think basically our range, we wouldn't really want to have any jams, right? Like with our entire range, I think we should be calling, because with our nutted hands, we want to just let them bluff off and allow the fish to continue. And then obviously with hands like this, we just, we want to see what type of run out happens. And who knows, like maybe we flat here, and then maybe the fish goes all in, and then the unknown goes all in, right? And then we can just have easy fold. So
yeah, absolutely, this can definitely happen.
So yeah, I think call here is standard as you did, and then fish gets out of the way, and then the river breaks off, and he shoves. So I mean, kind of expecting him to shove on the river, but I don't know, it's an interesting spot. What do you think here when he jams?
Yeah, on the turn, I definitely assign him some weaker hands, some bluffs, but yeah, it definitely felt weird on the river because it was a three-handed pot, and most of the time in three-handed pots, people bluff a little bit less. So I assign him definitely some queen jacks, some Jack-7 suited, some 6-7 suited. But there's always the random factor, right? That people still show up with hands like ace-jack, like king-queen clubs, like ace-10 from time to time. And when you factor everything in, our hand is too strong to make this fold. I think when a regular uses this line and we know he's kind of nitty, we should definitely fold river. Most people are not bluffing enough, especially with a fish in the pot, right? Because they lead against a regular that lead flop plus a fish behind that usually is not folding a bunch. So this is clearly more off for value. But like you mentioned before, against an unknown, it's really, really hard to make those folds. So when we think he has some bluffs, we have to make this call only when we are fairly sure that his turn leading range is too strong. Then folding would be an option. It's definitely not an easy decision on the river, I think. So I think I tanked for like 4 minutes because it's really not a common line. And I think it's always important to break down the hand, right? Think about what happened pre-flop, what happened on the flop, on the turn, which hands make sense. And yeah, I came to the conclusion that this hand is too strong to fold. Or what do you think about the situation on the river?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all your points. I think it's just a bit too strong to fold here. Just thinking about like where we are in our range. I mean, although I guess it is kind of funny because I guess considering our donking range and then our call turn range, we're probably actually not even that high up in that range. Like thinking about it now, maybe we have hands like 9-8 suited, which we could possibly fold, but I think 10-8 is still fairly low down because we still do have all our like queen jacks, and then we're gonna have, I guess we have like pocket eights we could play this way, 10-9 suited. But I think again, just given the random player factor, I wouldn't necessarily
that's the point.
Be thinking too much about like minimum defense frequency. We still have hands maybe like 10 jack that we could fold. Maybe some like ace 10 type hands if we played it funky like that. So I just think again, like you say, this hand's a bit too strong to fold. We have pretty good blockers blocking, his top two pair, blocking sets, and then we obviously unblock all of his draws. And then, as you said, the random play factor, people do show up here with like ace 10 jacks and just random stuff. Maybe some like, occasionally some random hands like ace jack. People play this way, right? Just trying to steal. So yeah, I think it's a good spot to call down here, given the price, which you do, and he actually shows up with kings. So I mean, that goes to show, right? You just can't really you can't make those tight folds until you have the reads.
And this is so ridiculous, right? That some players really show up with those overpairs after they flat call pre-flop against the cutoff. I mean, it's one thing to flat in like under the gun 1 against under the gun, really to slow play, right? Put in the 4-bet when someone squeezes, something like this. But this is just bad, and shows you how important pre-flop fundamentals are. Because of course, when he 3-bets pre-flop, I always get out of the way and he wins the hand.
Yeah.
And as we also see that he thinks his hand is way stronger than it is. Because when you think about my donk bet range, it's just crushed, right? I mean, with kings on this board texture, he has some equity against my draws. But it's so hard to play turns. It's so hard to play rivers. So he thinks he has a way stronger hand than he has, because he only has one pair on a super draw heavy board texture where we can have all the 2 pairs, all the sets, all the straights. So this hand really shows you that you should never assign a range that is too strong, especially against unknowns. So always factor in some random hands. And in similar situations, it's definitely a bad idea to call down with a hand like jacks, for example. Of course, in this specific situation, we can never have jacks because jacks would squeeze. But you never want to block those draws. You always want that your opponent can have hands like ace jack, where you can just rip the river. And when you block those hands, obviously it's much more likely that your opponent has some strong hands, stuff like this. But of course, I never expected him to show up with kings. Pretty funny.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of just the random play factor that you can't really make two solid reads. Like it's one of those kind of paradoxes of live poker that like you generally want to play fairly tight against like multi-street aggression, especially in like big bets, over bets. I don't think people are balanced enough in those lines where I think they do have a lot more value as opposed to bluffs. But then it's funny because there's a lot of players who will have random value hands like this, and then also a lot of players who are just learning how to bluff who have like way too many like offsuit combos, and they're just doing like random spazzy shit, and you try to assign them a pretty realistic range, and sometimes you make a tight fold, and then you learn after you watch them play for a bit, and you realize maybe they're going bananas with like all these random hands, right? So it's really, I think the best way to approach it really is like early on, try to play as close to like good fundamentals, like don't fold hands near the top of your range unless you have like really good reads, and just kind of proceed from
when
there.
he bets too big, right?
Yeah. Like if players are making huge bets, you can tighten up a bit. But I think the way poker's going now is that people they're slowly loosening up, but they don't necessarily know how to construct proper ranges for bluffing, so they can be like massively unbalanced in some spots if they have a bunch of offsuit combos. So it's just, it's obviously, it's a tough game to play against those type of players. But I think overall, be pretty mindful of like, regulars and like nitty regulars when they take these lines, using a lot of big bets. That's when you want to get out of the way. But I think versus other players, especially early on in a session, if you just, if you have some hands near the top of your range, usually just pay it off if you're getting a pretty good price and just see what they have, right? Because if they show you something like this, that's going to give you so much info for the future where this guy can have like random, like thin value bets and stuff he should have 3-bet pre-flop. So yeah, it's definitely good to get that information.
Yeah, good points. And I think when he really goes all in for 2 times pot size, it's a different story. Then we definitely have way better hands, and the more our opponent bets, the more hands we can fold on the river. Then I would definitely my middling 2-pair. So yeah, remember this. I think this was interesting hand, pretty unorthodox hand. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, always feel free to comment.
All right, take it easy, guys.
Yeah, take care. Bye.